Good evening, everybody. I'm Brian Amcrott, the Executive Director of the Laura and Alvin Siegal Lifelong Learning Program at Case Western Reserve University, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's program. We are pleased to present tonight's event as part of the Violins of Hope Cleveland project, which is really an unprecedented multi-institutional partnership, including but not limited to Case Western Reserve University, the Cleveland Institute of Music, the Cleveland Orchestra, Facing History and Ourselves, IdeaStream, the Jewish Federation of Cleveland, and the Maltz Museum of Jewish Heritage. We encourage you to visit the Violins of Hope exhibition at the Maltz Museum, which is opening to the public this Friday and running through January 3rd. And there is a full schedule of programs related to the Violins of Hope that can be found both in the Violins of Hope brochures, which many of you may have seen. We have some more on the table in the back if you want to pick one up on your way out. And at the website, violinsofhopecle, that's CLE.org. Please note on your seats some flyers for programs that we have here in the Siegal Lifelong Learning Program, including tomorrow night's session in our series on substance abuse. Next week, we're hosting a public policy forum on land use in Northeast Ohio. That's October 7th. October 21st, as part of Violins of Hope series, we're going to have a lecture with Professor James Young from the University of Massachusetts, who will be speaking on the language of memorial architecture between Berlin and New York. I'm going to introduce our moderator for this evening, and he will later introduce our speakers. Eric Kish is a graduate of Melbourne University and holds 2 MA degrees from Columbia University. A retired market researcher and consultant, he has had a lifelong passion for classical music, and in his retirement has a dual career of teaching in the Case Western Reserve University Lifelong Learning Program and presenting a weekly show, Musical Passions, on 104.9 WCLV Classical FM. Beginning October 15th, Eric is teaching a 6-session class here at Siegal titled Jews and Music in the Holocaust Era. Eric will moderate tonight's conversation, including posing questions from the audience, so please write out any questions you may have. If you did not pick up a note and card and pencil, just hold your hand up and someone will bring it to you. As soon as you have a question, just wave your card in the air and someone will retrieve that as well, and we will bring them up to the stage. So please join me in welcoming Eric, and he will introduce our distinguished guests from Israel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brian, for that very warm welcome, and a very warm welcome to all of you to this auspicious evening in which we have not one but 3 distinguished guests. And it is my pleasure and indeed my honor to introduce Amnon Weinstein, who is a Tel Aviv-based luthier, which is the technical term for violin maker and repairer, who is the person who has been restoring the violins, which we know as the Violins of Hope. And with him is his wife, Asela, who has an amazing background, being the daughter of one of the Bielski brothers, who, those of you who have ever seen the movie Defiance, about the 3 brothers and their work saving Jews in the forests of Belarus, that's Asi's pedigree. And with them is their son, Avshalom, Avsi, who is the 3rd generation of luthiers in the Amnon, in the Weinstein family. All of this really began with Amnon's father, Moshe, who, born in Vilna, emigrated with his wife, Golda, to Palestine in 1938, and in 1939 opened a violin repair shop catering mostly to the string players of the newly formed Palestine Philharmonic Orchestra, which today is the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra. And Amnon then followed in his father's footsteps, training both in Cremona in Italy, which is the home of the Guarneris and the Stradivarius and the Amati violins, and also in Paris with one of the most renowned violin makers and restorers. Avshi then became a member of the luthiers tradition, and now has his own business in Istanbul, although he and his father are still working very closely in terms of restoring Violins of Hope. So this is just the barest outline of how the family got to where it is. What I haven't mentioned yet is the fact that when Moshe and Golda emigrated, all of their family stayed behind. And it was not until the end of the war that they discovered to their horror that all 400 of the family had perished in the Holocaust. Amnon's father had a heart attack and never spoke about this again, a quite common reaction to survivors or people who received the news. And so Amnon grew up pretty much unaware of the kinds of tragedies that had faced the family, until one day a man brought in a violin that had apparently come from one of the concentration camps. This was either a relative or a survivor, and asked him to repair it. And in that violin, when he took it apart, he found a gray ash. And that was a violin from Auschwitz. And who knows what that gray ash was, but it was not a good sign. It was very tough for Amnon to deal with this. And it was a young German bowmaker whose name, I believe, was Daniel Schmidt, who kept asking questions about the violins which Amnon's father, Moshe, had accumulated from the members of the Palestine, now Israel Philharmonic, that were German manufacture in which they refused to play. Some smashed the violins and others gave them away. They were, for all intents and purposes, worthless. But then this surviving violin came, and it started off a lifelong passion. So Amnon, to kind of start the evening off, do you want to tell us what was it that made you finally decide to take up this extraordinary odyssey of dedicating most of your life for the last 20 years to restoring these violins, which kept coming more and more into your studio?
It's difficult today to tell when it happens, because it was a long, long way. And this bowmaker, Daniel Schmidt, he asked me for 2 years to do a lecture about all these violins. We arrived to Israel at 36, when Bronislav Huberman created the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra of today. And most of the musicians there, I'm talking now the string instruments, first of all, they were the best of the best of the best from Europe. And then most of them had German instruments, German-made. And when they came over to Israel, each one brought himself 2 violins, 3 violins, 2 viola, 2 cellos, because Israel was in those times empty, we are calling it. Nothing, even string, you had to bring from Europe. And if something happened to a violin, you have to send it to Europe, and then you have nothing to play on it. So they have some instrument, and they could change it all the time in a case that they need it. Now, the 45, 46, when we had in Israel all the atrocities of the war, people have done a bow cut on all German-made object, from car to a violin bow. And they came to my father, the string players, and told him, if you are not buying the violin or the cello or the viola, we are going to break it. And my father knew that he can never sell them again. He bought each instrument that people brought to him. So in a short time, he made a collection of outstanding German-made instruments, which stayed in our collection without even never playing on them for many, many years. Now, when this guy has seen all this treasury, he asked me to make a lecture about all this instrument for the German and bow maker and violin maker association, that people will know something about what happened in the war. So I didn't want to touch it. As you said, we lost our family, 400 people around, and for me the Holocaust was something that I didn't want even to touch. But after 2 years I couldn't stand anymore. He's begging for this lecture, and I said, okay, I will do it, and we did it, and that's the beginning of Violins of Hope. Because all those people who came to Israel and stayed and played in the orchestra until 45 in this case, stayed alive. Many of them who came and could not exist like this, let's say, in the not very good condition of Israel in those times, because they were used to Berlin or to Vienna or to Warsaw, and you're coming to a city that your camels are going in the street and donkeys are to do transport. So in this case, they left Israel, and somebody did a research. None of them was alive after 45. All of them killed in the war. So that's the name, Violins of Hope.
What was the first violin that you got of what's become the collection of Violins of Hope? Not the German ones, but the ones from the Holocaust that led you to this amazing voyage that you've been on now for 20 years.
Coming back from this lecture, I spoke on, sorry for my voice, on a radio program, and I asked for violins with stories from the war, because I knew there have been many violin players everywhere, in the camps, in the ghettos, and I wanted to get them, to see them. I got a telephone call, we have a violin, I will come to bring it to you, and this is a Zimmermann violin that we have in the exhibition and played in the concert. A violin made by a Jewish violin maker named Yaakov Zimmermann in Warsaw in 1924, dedicated to his best friend, Shimon Kongold. In the exhibition, you can see the violin and the photo of Mr. Kongold. And slowly, slowly. And the violin, not only that it has 2 Stars of David on it, the label inside the violin, because in all the violins, the maker are putting a label. Once you have the choice to see a Stradivari or Guarneri, also they did a label. And then it's written, this violin I dedicated to my loyal friend, Shimon Kongold, Warsaw, 1924, Yaakov Zimmermann. In those times, he was one of the 3 known Jewish violin makers. Later on, I don't know how many we are today. And the story of Yaakov Zimmermann, that he was a very good maker and a very knowledgeable. And when I spoke to Ida Händel, the great violinist, she told me immediately, let me sit down because I'm trembling. She knew him since she was a little girl, because Yaakov Zimmermann gave her all her violins, bows, strings, and everything. There is another big name, Michel Schwalbe, the concertmeister of the Berliner Philharmonic Orchestra, the same. And the most important part, he was a teacher of my father. When he decided to come to Israel, to immigrate to Israel, he said that all the Jewish people are playing the violin and you need somebody to repair them. So he learned how to repair violins and he came to Israel on 38.
I think that's an amazing story in terms of the circle closing when Amnon, was it you or your father who discovered the inscription? You did.
Yeah,
right?
but this is, you can see it from, on every violin there is a label, you see it from what we are calling the F-holes, the openings that there is on each violin. And then you can see label of Stradivari, Guarneri, on Zimmermann, also my violins. There is a label inside with our name. It's a signature like on painting.
But you discovered the Zimmermann violin.
No, there was nothing to discover.
No, but you
We got it. I didn't answer your question.
okay.
Some Hebrew helps.
It's always good to have the wife here to...
I didn't follow you, sorry.
That's okay.
All the story of Violins of Hope came over after my father
Okay,
passed away.
that's really what I...
And unfortunately, he was not a witness of all what we are doing today.
Now, the story of the Violins of Hope is an amazing one. As the restorations proceeded, and there are now, I believe, over 40 that have been... 60 that have been restored, an amazing number. And they were first played at concerts in Turkey. And now, from the vantage point of 2015, I can tell you they've been played in Jerusalem, Paris, London, Madrid, in Switzerland, in Monaco, in Rome, Charlotte, North Carolina, and now here in Cleveland, we have a 3-month celebration of a series of events and concerts and lectures and recitals, all featuring this and the stories behind them. How did this thing actually get started? It would seem to be that Turkey is an unusual place for something like this to get going. And if all of you would care to join in, Avshalom?
Once we started repairing the violins, I think we had about 3 or 4 ready. We have a very close friend, Jihad Ashkin, who is going to come and play here on the 14th of October with the CIM. And he asked my father, he said, listen, if the violins are ready, why don't we do a concert? And he arranged with the Jewish community in Istanbul, we had 2 concerts. And then a few years later, another 2 concerts. And this is how it began.
Amazing that this story, the friend they're talking about is in fact a Turkish Muslim who has been very involved in this saga and has made a number of arrangements of melodies that will be featured, in fact, at one of the concerts coming up. Now, I want to turn briefly to the book by James Grimes, which many of you may have read or certainly have seen, which talks about Amnon's story and gives a detailed chapter on the history of about 7 violins that are part of the Violins of Hope. The stories are absolutely harrowing, and the amount of research that has gone into these stories must be prodigious. Now, you were involved with James Grimes, who came to visit you in Tel Aviv to your workshop. How did this book come about initially? Did he come to you and say, I want to write a book, tell me about it? Or did he talk with you and then as a result of these conversations, the idea for the book grew?
We did a project in Charlotte. And he's a professor for music in Charlotte University. Then, when he heard about the project, he got in love with the project, with all the stories, and he came over and he asked me, I would like to do a book. So he came to Israel, he went even to Norway, and he have done a huge research, even much more than what I could do, because I'm a violin maker, I'm not a research man to go to libraries and everything, and he found stories that nobody knew about them even. And that's how he collected all the information, and he wrote this book. And I have to say, all the information there is 100% correct. For him, it was important if it was 9 o'clock or 9:30. That was the point of accuracy that he wanted to have in his book. So he found out about these violins, which one he wants to write. He wrote about them, except one violin. All the violin in this book, they are in the exhibition and in the concert hall. Here in Cleveland, I'm talking.
Okay, so read the book and take it with you when you go to the Maltz Museum and look at the violin that is the subject of a chapter in the book. Which, of course, is, I've got to ask this question, which is the violin that's not in the book?
Oh, many.
No, sorry, not, it's in the book that's not here in Cleveland.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I
that's a
misspoke.
violin, which the story there, it's almost like a mystery story, and it could be even a story for a movie from Bergen, Norway. And the violin,
Oh, Ole Bull's.
Ole Bull violins, exactly. And this is a huge story, and unfortunately it's difficult to handle with the orchestra of Oslo that owns this violin. So we had it for some concert, but unfortunately not here. But the story is here, it's beautiful. I think it's the most beautiful chapter in this book.
It's the most beautiful, but it's not the most harrowing. Some of the stories are really very, very hard to read, especially if, as in my case, one of them mirrors very closely my father's experiences in two concentration camps. And what Grimes discovered were all of the details that my father never talked about. Of the violins that you've restored, including the ones that are talked about here, which for you is the most moving story, the most emotionally rich of the restorations?
This question is very difficult. All these violins are my children, and there is not one child that I love more than the other. They are all important because each violin is standing for somebody who, some of them were alive after the war, but most of them were killed in the war, and this is a memorial to each person. So you cannot say this one is better and this one is a little bit less. Impossible for me. For me, all of them are the best.
Can I answer this question?
Go ahead. Nancy.
Is it okay? Yeah.
A mother's right to talk about
I
the
must
children.
say, I think the most moving story, the most emotional violin, is the one we don't have. And I'll tell you a story. We know the story, we don't know the violin. We haven't seen it. If there was anyone here this afternoon in the, where were we? In the Federation, I think. Well, not, right? So I can tell it, because we were talking about it this afternoon. There was a little boy in Romania, in the ghetto, Avram Melamed. And he was a prodigy child. He played the violin. He was an only child, little kid. Once the ghetto was started and everybody was in it, the commander of the ghetto heard about this child who plays the violin, and he ordered him, didn't ask him, he ordered him to come every day and practice in his room. And so he did. On the other hand, he protected him. He protected the child. One day, there was a train going to concentration camps, to one of the camps with people who were caught on the street, in the homes. And Avram's parents were caught and taken into the train. Somebody told the little boy, and he ran to the commander, who released his parents, Avram's parents. At the end, Avram survived, and his parents did too, and they immigrated to Palestine, to Israel. And as he was a young teenager, lived on a kibbutz, not too far from Haifa, and one day he and some friends of his, he stopped playing. I mean, he had the violin, but that was it. Very important. One day the commander went home on vacation and brought back, when he came back, he brought his own personal violin and gave it to Avram to play. It was a better violin. Avram played, and the violin stayed with him. After the war, in Israel, he went to the city, Haifa, to go to the cinema, to have ice cream with friends, and he had no money. So he traded a violin for a few nothing, for a ticket, for ice cream, maybe for some pennies. And that's the story of the violin. We cannot get it. We don't know where it is, of course. And Avram was a friend of Amnon and a little bit of me too. When I worked on the radio, the IPO, the musicians of the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra, used to do their reserve duty on the military radio where I worked. So I had the privilege they used to take me to work and back every day. And when I was pregnant with you, and this is when I heard the story of the violin. At the time, of course, we had no intentions of spending our life looking for violins of the war, so that was out of the question. But I heard the story from Avram, and it was a sad story. He died a few years ago. He was sick and he died, and we have a story. So this is the violin. I think that moves us most.
I thought
And
you...
Amnon has something to add to it, very important.
Now, this is a story of 4 months ago. I got a violin. The 2 sisters from Romania played on it. And the story was that they were going all around Romania, then they tried to come illegally to Israel. They were in Cyprus. And when they came to give me the violin that the 2 sisters played, one, she passed away, and the other sister is still alive, then I told him the story of Avram Melamed, because it's also Romania. And the husband of the sister told me, I know this camp, I know everything what was going there. He didn't know exactly the story of Melamed, but he knew that there was something like that. And he told me, don't give the German that they were so nice. The commander of this camp was Romanian. That's why he was so nice to the kid. And after the war, Avram Melamed went to testify for him, so he was not hanged like all the other commander of other camps. And by the way, when the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra went the first time to a visit in Auschwitz, on the train, they interviewed him. And he told the story, and I think maybe they will show some pieces of this documentary here in the museum. But it was on all our television to see it, and it was a beautiful interview about the story on the train that you can hear, and like all the Jewish people, they were on train coming to Auschwitz to tell the story on the way to Auschwitz with a violin, of course, because then you had another violin.
Well, Asi, I thought when you were going to be talking about a young boy, I thought you would be telling the story of Modeler's violin, and that is one of the stories that moved me the most, because we're dealing here with a young boy of 12 whose extraordinary heroism, enabled as a result of his violin playing ability, is quite a shattering. Do you want to talk about Modeler?
I will. Many years ago, a friend of mine approached me and he told me, one day I will give you a story that you never heard before about the violin. When my lecture in Germany approached the time, I told him, now or never. Then he brought me a violin, and the story is his grandfather was a commander of Jewish partisans, a group of mixed, Russian and Jewish. And then one day, walking in the forest, they've seen a boy sleeping beside a tree and a violin case beside him. They woke him up and took him with them. The boy didn't want to say one word before that he is Jewish or not Jewish. He was still afraid because he had seen all his family killed in front of his eyes. The name we know today is Modeler Schlein. And the moment that the commander, who was an engineer and musician, learned that this boy is playing violin. He asked him to play, and he played very well. I think he was a very talented guy from the stories that I know about him. So he had a plan. And to make it short, the partisans were not far away from a place in White Russia that was a kind of nightclub, how we're calling it in those times, or canteen of the Germans. So he asked his son, the son of the commander, and the boy to go and to play on the stair of a church. The boy played the violin, the son of the commander was singing, and of course the boy played very well, and then the German commander passing through heard this boy playing and say, okay, come to play for us in our canteen. So the boy came over and played there, and how I know that he was talented, because after 1 day or 2 days, he learned to play on the violin all the tunes of the Germans who were singing it all the time. And you need a very special talent for that. When the boy was accepted there like a friend of the Nazis, the commander, Dadya Misha, asked him to describe the place. And he told him all the details of the place. And then, day by day, the little boy put in his pocket, in the violin case, everywhere, dynamite. And Dadya Misha told him exactly where to put it, how much to put it, what to do with that, exactly everything. He was an engineer, so he knew where are the fable, how you're saying, not
The
stable
weaknesses,
things,
the
yeah,
structures, the
of
weaknesses in the structure of the
When
place.
everything was ready, they were teaching him how to light this fuse. And then the story is he was lighting the fuse, ran away. The son of the commander waited for him on a horse somewhere. And when they were running back to the partisan, they heard the bomb, they've seen the fire. And how to say, he said to himself, this is a revenge of all my family. Later on, when he tried to save a Russian officer from an ambush of German soldiers, he was killed. And Dadya Misha kept this violin all his lifetime, gave it to his son, and the grandson brought this violin to me. We decided that this violin is a very special story, and we decided to give it to Yad Vashem. And when you're coming there, now not, because it's here, you can see the violin in a very special place with the Dadya Misha description and the story of this group of partisans. I would like to add something. The moment that I heard this story, which is something unbelievable, I called Asi's mother and asked her if she knew Dadya Misha. And she told me, of course. There was a mixed group, Russian and Jewish, and all the Jewish festivities, they came over to the Bielskis. But she never remembered the boy because he was even not 1 year together with them. And she knew very well Dadya Misha, of course, and they were acting in a parallel all the time in the forest. There is a distance of 50 kilometers. So they knew each other, they knew the two groups. So it's a reality. And Dadya Misha after wrote many books, by the way, and there is a book about this motale in Yiddish and English and Hebrew and for children. This I can tell you.
Well, this is a great lead-in with the story of one boy who was very active with a particular partisan group. Now, what Amnon has just said is a revelation to me that the partisan group that was really Asi's family, they actually knew one another and they interacted. But this is a lead-in for you to tell us about your past. One of the central commandments in Jewish tradition is the word zocher, which is remember. And it is, I guess, incumbent on all of us. In fact, the whole of Jewish history is the story of memory. And the painful events of the Second World War, where the first generation, including me, are sort of on our way out, it is important that these stories be transmitted. And therefore, the work that Amnon and Asi and Avshalom are doing to keep the memory of those departed people and their fates alive in our mind is so important. So Asi, the floor is yours.
Where shall I start? Maybe from the film Defiance. Have many people seen it?
How many of you have seen the film Defiance?
Oh,
Okay, so there's some homework to be done, if you care. It's a story, a really miracle happened to us, to our family, because our story was picked up and became a book that was written by a woman in America and then by a journalist of the New York Times, and it got to some people who heard about it in Hollywood, and it became a film called Defiance. From the name, you understand what it's all about. And it tells the story in a Hollywood way, of course. But even though it's not a documentary and it doesn't tell the story chronologically, and it actually changes the real facts, but it does touch upon the main issues of living in extreme situations, in extreme weather, in forests, young children, old people, and fighters and young people. And it tells the story of my father and his brothers. There were 12 in the family. 5 of them were in the forest, including a sister and a young boy who was 13, who's still alive in America. And he's 90-something today now. And the 3 brothers, the elder brothers, were the commanders of the unit. They started it as a family group, not thinking about the future or not believing that they could fight the German army. But they wanted to survive from one day to the other. And they first took their wives out into the forest, and then the young children were not couldn't live in the forest. They were given to Gentile families. Actually, one of my cousins, who was a hidden child, is going to come here for the concert of in 2 weeks. Anyway, it started as a family group, and then when they realized what the Germans were doing, they got all. I'm talking about Belarusia, White Russia, Belarus today. Over there, the Germans took the Jews into ghettos from all the villages and little shtetls around, and marched them by the thousands into the nearby forest and just shot them there. You know the story of Babi Yar, Ponar. It's repeated everywhere in Eastern Europe. And when my family realized that this is what was going to happen, that this was not going to happen, that this was happening, they decided not to go to the ghetto, to stay in the forest, and to take as many people as they could out of the ghetto. First, they took the young ones and they asked them to bring weapons, to buy weapons from Gentiles here, there, get them somehow and bring it out into the forest. They had a Gentile, a Goy, whose name was Kozlovsky, who spoke Yiddish and worked in our flour mill. He used to go into the ghetto and bring a letter from Tuvia, the commander, my uncle, Tuvia. And Kozlovsky brought a letter and said, well, the Bielskis are waiting for you. You want to come out? Come. Many years later, after the Yom Kippur War in Israel, this was Like Amnon said, he couldn't deal with the subject of the Holocaust. Many people couldn't. I don't know about you, but I couldn't until the Yom Kippur War. And this is the first time I worked on the military radio in Israel, Galei Tzahal. And this was the first time I decided to do something about this story that was unknown in Israel, because my uncles immigrated to America. They first came to Israel, those who survived, the commanders. They came to Israel for a few years and then they left for America. And I was the only Bielski in Israel. And of course, I had my life to live, you know. But then after the Yom Kippur War, that was a bad one. It was a difficult time. I decided to do a program on the radio. And most partisans were still alive. I got them all together in my mother's house. And we recorded actually with Israel Wiener, who's here, who's actually involved in made us come here to Cleveland. He works here with the Jewish Federation. Anyway, I made this program and I heard them singing and dancing and talking endlessly. We know that many people who went through the war in the camps and had such horrible experiences kept quiet, did not tell the stories, couldn't face the past. Partisans were different. They wouldn't stop talking about it. For them, it's a part of my life, and I told you before that this is what bothers me. I mean, I would like to understand what went through in their life during the war. What I realized is that this was the prime of their life. Even though they were hungry, they went hungry for years. They had no clothes. Sometimes the shoes looked more like rugs than anything else. Even though all of them lost many family members. There were people who were the only ones left of a big family. In our family, even though some were saved, about 6 uncles of mine, brothers and sisters of my parents, and my grandparents on my father's side, the Bielskis, were all killed in the pits, in the forest. But for those who survived, this was the prime of their life. They spoke about the forest as if it was out of the Bible, you know, like Gan Eden, like paradise, as if it was beautiful. And the snow was beautiful. Maybe you would agree, I don't know, about
Clevelanders
snow.
don't feel so great about snow.
The snow was beautiful for them. The sun was shining on the snow. This is how they talked. And they had horses at one time. They forgot the bitterness and the misery. And for them it was the glorious time of their life. Of course, they were alive, they were fighting, they were falling in love, going through many difficulties. Women could not have children. They used to do abortions. Many women couldn't have children after the war because of the horrible abortions they had in the forest. But still, it was a glorious time for them in many ways.
Well, your father and your uncles, basically, the Bielskis put together a community in that forest of 1,200 people and kept them alive for roughly 3 to 4 years, from about 1942, 41 to the end of the war. Yeah, until the Russians basically liberated.
Yeah, this was in July. They were liberated in July 44. Almost a year before the war ended, it still went on.
It's an amazing story. I not only recommend the film, but also the home movies afterwards. The uncles that Asi is talking about, after the war, emigrated to New York, where they set up a trucking business, I think, and nobody ever talked about anything until the book came out. But if you want to see what they really look like, do see the extra, which is the home movies, which are very funny and bring these people really to life in the present day. Well, thank you so much for that very revealing picture. The fact that they saw this as the greatest moment of their lives is not surprising. For anybody who was involved in rescue events during this time, that was the case. There was an American who was very active at the beginning of the war in Marseille, rescuing mostly Jewish intellectuals and so on, and getting them visas and out of France. A man by the name of Varian Fry, who did his job brilliantly, originally went to France at the behest of some committee to rescue 200 people, and it's estimated that he saved over 2,000 before the State Department and the Vichy government got mad and had him recalled. The people he saved included Marc Chagall, Jakob Lifshitz, Alma Mahler, Franz Werfel. I mean, this was an amazing group of people. And if you read the biography of Varian Fry, and I only bring this up, is that very clearly those 18 months that he was in Marseille were the highlight of his life. And after that, in a sense, it was downhill all the way. Nothing ever met with that kind of a high. Well, luckily, after you were spared all of this real horror by being born in Israel and growing up in relative peace. I use the word relative advisedly. And you followed your father into the family business as violin maker and repairer, but your sisters didn't. Is that because this is not a woman's job, or because you felt this was something special for you?
Well, first of all, you'll have to ask her and my brother why they didn't join the business.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. No, there are many women violin and bow makers. It's nothing to do with only men. So that would not be the reason. I guess she liked insects more. So she did her postdoctorate in Stanford in California, and now she's working over there. And my brother is doing research with biochemics, so they're doing good. They're fine. They got the brains, I guess.
I think that much more interesting, the point of view that he is our son, and a family that on one hand, we lost 400 people, and on the other hand, her family killed so many soldiers, German soldiers in this case. So for him, until today, I cannot understand how he approached this, how you say, meeting, what we are calling, the parallel life between me and my wife in this case, and the Holocaust. Because for me, the Holocaust, until now, I'm only studying what happened there, and I cannot live it anymore. And the partisans, I've been with them, I knew them. It's unbelievable the happiness of life that those people showed. And when I remember my parents, you know, they were never talking about. I don't remember any time of who knows what happiness. And until a very certain age, Rosh Hashanah, Passover, Pesach, we were 4 people around the table. And that's where was my life. There's no grandfather, grandmother, uncles, nothing. And it's to grow up like that, it's completely different. Today, when I'm 76 and I'm with grandchildren, I understand exactly what I lost in this case. This is a completely different issue.
Well, I think at this point it's appropriate to pause. Brian had mentioned at the beginning that Amnon and Asi and Avshi willing to answer some questions, and that there were some cards passed around. So if anybody has Great. I hope I can read them, but let's... Here, it's a very good question to open with. Please tell us about the violin that Shlomo Mintz played last Sunday at the inauguration of the Maltz Center for the Performing Arts. Is this the violin, the best of those that you repaired?
It's very hard to say if this is the best. It's one of the best made instruments. But when you're talking about sound, it's very, very individual. And if you bring 2 or 3 players and you put stereo violins for them in front of them, usually they will not pick the same one. So this is the one that Shlomo picked. Is this the best one? Probably in his hands, this is the best one.
Does he consistently play that way?
Yeah, this is the violin that he's playing before now, about 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
And this violin used to belong to the first concertmaster of the Palestine Orchestra, who immigrated from Vienna. He was a student of Huberman, and Huberman insisted for him to come to Israel to be the first concertmaster, a position that he had until he was retired.
Interesting you talk about concertmasters, because the next question has to do with a lady called Alma Rose. Rosé, who was the niece of Gustav Mahler and who was the leader of the women's orchestra at Auschwitz. And she basically kept alive by playing, and also kept alive all of the women in the orchestra. She died, it is believed, of typhus rather than in the gas chambers. But I mean, the Germans were destroying their own cultural heritage with their insane policies. Has her violin ever surfaced?
Not the violin which she had in Europe. The violin which she played prior to going back to Europe. She left Europe when the war started. They immigrated to London with her father, and then later on she came back. Now the violin she came back with is gone. The violin that she had before the war is today played by one of the violin professors, one of the most known violin professor, Zachar Bron.
So her legacy survives too. And this is also a question for you. Why and how did you end up in Istanbul?
My wife lives there.
How did you get to Cleveland? It was a job. My wife, okay, fine. I guess this is a more general question, and one that had not occurred to me until I read this, but it's a good one. Are there other instruments being saved and repaired? Not just string instruments, which you are working on, because I know at the concert one of the cellists stood up so that you had repaired a cello from the Holocaust. What about brass instruments, wind instruments, anything there?
Usually these instruments don't last that long.
That's not survived.
To run around with a big trombone or a tuba or something like that wouldn't be easy.
In Auschwitz, in the little exhibitions that they have there are few instruments in very, very bad shape, because all these wind instruments are not for 2,000 years, what we are calling. A violin can survive 500 years, but the wind instruments are getting destroyed after 50, 60 years. Oh. And in the conditions they played in the camps, it's finished.
In the descriptions in the book and in articles that I've read, some of the violins that you're restoring were in really terrible shape as a result of being played outdoors in the snow and in the rain. And we're talking about wooden instruments, and the fact that they could still be played at all under those conditions is remarkable. But you can imagine that 45 is the end of the war, and another 40 years later, they certainly condition would not have improved. What is actually involved in repairing? Clearly, if you've got the front of a violin, which is totally warped, you have to then take another piece of wood and restore it. So how much of the violin that is restored, I'm saying with violins, would apply also to violas and to cellos, are actually the original pieces of wood?
Everything is original. Everything is repairable because what we usually use is glue that you can open and re-glue it. So even if the varnish is gone, you can retouch it and remake it up to a certain point. It will never be the original varnish, but it will be good enough. And you can repair most of the cracks, and you do reinforcements or doubling, whatever is needed, depending on the situation
Okay.
of the instrument.
We can repair every violin in the worst condition of it. This is
Amazing.
It's done that you can repair it.
It's all about the time, that's it.
Do you want to?
Of course, there was a violin that came to the workshop in pieces, in a plastic bag. And they put it together. It's alive, you know? It's
You can
beautiful.
save life.
Yeah.
There are pictures in the brochures and flyers, etc., for the Violins of Hope, and some of the violins have Magen Davids on them. And how did they get there, or what was the purpose of that kind of specifically Jewish decoration? I guess I've never seen in orchestral musicians or musicians that I know.
This you will not see usually in the orchestra. These are very simple instruments. They were done either in Czechoslovakia or Germany, depends on the time that you look on the map. This was done originally like that, usually for Jewish people, because I don't see anyone else buying something with Magen David in beginning of 1900s. But the same places actually did also decoration of crosses and other ornaments for gypsies. So it was not only Magen David. They had a whole line of things, but because there were lots of Jewish people who played the violin, and this was kind of an attraction to have something more Jewish, more personal in a way. So they did instruments like that as well.
Doesn't hurt to have the violin decorated with a few Magen Davids if you're playing klezmer and are looking for work
For
at
extra,
weddings and bar
extra
mitzvahs,
work
right?
and extra money, yeah. It's all about the business.
It's a business.
Show business.
One story I heard from a relative of a man regarded as the one of the greatest cellists at the beginning of the first half of the 20th century, a man by the name of Emanuel Feuermann. And an aunt of mine was a friend of a relative of his, and the story is told that the Feuermann family were klezmer musicians, and at some point the cellist left or died or got sick, and so they went into the closet and pulled a cello out and said, "Here, Manny, you play." And out of that beginning came, you know, a supreme artist of the instrument. This is a question for you, Asi. I saw the movie Defiance, and at the time I was told that your family was related to the Bielski family, who was then in Cleveland. Is that? Do you have any relatives in Cleveland? No?
But I met today a nice man whose parents were saved at the Bielskis. They were partisans with the Bielskis.
Here in Cleveland?
The man lives in Cleveland, yes.
2 degrees of separation.
Reuven, Robert, his American name is Robert Zelwin. And I met him today, and it's unbelievable. We even have, we spent some time together this afternoon, and I told him about a photograph that I saw in Villa Van Zee. I don't know if you know what it is.
The Van Zee?
The
yeah.
Van Zee
Oh.
Villa, very famous. It's
That's where the final solution
was decided. This is where,
established and signed.
yeah, in Berlin. And I saw it, today it's a museum dedicated to the Holocaust. Very simple photos, some documents, and that's it. And on one of the walls, there's a photograph of Bielski survivors of the Bielski group, at Trad, it's called, the brigade. And when they were in a DP camp near Munich in Germany after the war. And when I was there, the historian of Villa Vanze, I was very excited. I saw my mother there, my grandmother, aunts, uncles, and the historian of Villa Vanze came to me to ask if I can identify some of the people. Some I could. And Robert Zelwyn identified, we showed him the photograph. Of course, not today, you know, with iPads and all that, you carry your history in your pocket. So we showed him the photograph and said, of course, there's my father, my mother, and an aunt. And I wrote the names down, and I'm going to send it to the man in Villa Vanze to put the names on the wall. Yes, and he lives here in Cleveland.
But that's important. You are, in a sense, a living witness of this thing called a photograph of people. And I think they're very lucky that you're able to do this. Let me sort of finish off with just a couple of questions that are related. And this is, I think, a very good one. Ultimately, what will become of these instruments? Will they go to a museum? Will they continue to be played? Will you continue to travel around and give concerts and things? Or at this point, I guess this is for you. You're the that's your job, right?
Well, we don't have a museum. None of the museums asked to have a permanent exhibition. And right now, this is not the aim. Right now, the aim is to go around and to show the instruments and to tell the Holocaust and the war story from a different angle, like we were doing in the past few years. If there will be a request, we'll have to think about it. But anyway, this will not be a permanent exhibition. Even if we decide to have one, the instruments will travel around.
Okay, what is important, I think, is, it's the hidden subtext in everything we've talked about, and that is that it is important that the violins speak, and that means they must be played, not hung in closets or in museums. It is interesting, in the last couple of months, two very famous violins, which were stolen over 50 years ago, have suddenly emerged and been restored. One was a violin owned by Bronislaw Huberman, which was stolen out of his dressing room at Carnegie Hall in the 1940s.
Before.
And
37, I think. I don't remember the year, but it's before 40.
Before 40. In Carnegie Hall, and that emerged 50 years later, and had been stolen by a guy who had kind of played it in a sort of low-level street band or jazz band or something. And on his deathbed, he said something to his wife that this is not just an ordinary violin, and make sure that you get a decent sum for it. And that's how the violin was discovered. It is now owned by, Joshua Bell says it's owned by his bank. But Joshua Bell is playing Huberman's violin. And another famous Jewish violinist by the name of Roman Totenberg, whose daughter is Nina Totenberg, who I imagine this audience is very familiar with as the legal correspondent for NPR. Her father had a Stradivarius stolen out of his dressing room, and he received a payment at the time of $300,000 from the insurance company. And this violin suddenly surfaced and is worth millions. So the family was very happy to pay the insurance company back their $300,000. But one of the things that Nina Totenberg emphasized in the program dealing with her father's violin was that the family was adamant that the violin only be sold to somebody who was going to play it. They were not interested in having it hung on the wall or behind glass of a collector.
I don't know which violinist can actually afford something like that today.
Well, the certainly well-known violinists have
You're talking about,
millions.
if this is a good Stradivari, it's about the minimum would be $6 to $7 million.
Well, sometimes you get a group of philanthropists who will buy it
Yeah, but
and
it's
then
not,
lend it
it's,
to.
I know quite a few people who had a lifetime guarantee to have an instrument, and then a few years later they got a phone call like, listen, sorry, but you have two weeks to give the instrument back.
Oh boy.
It's happened
Well, I
to
hope
many
that-
violinists.
I hope that won't happen to these. All right, two final questions. I think we're going to be running out of time. One is, do you have any plans to go to South America with the Violins of Hope?
Mexico in February.
You're going to Mexico, okay? Does that answer the question promptly enough?
We actually have, we started talking with someone from Panama, but we have to see if this is going to emerge to something real.
Okay, from the frozen north, those violins are going to get quite a tropical workout. And then, which violin did you never expect to see? Is the answer any of them, I suppose?
I think every violin is a story. I mean, we can't just keep on telling little stories, but every violin has when it's brought by a family, it's a living story, so it's endless.
Well, I hope it's endless and
Yes,
that you
it
get
is,
more and
it
more
is.
of them.
Sold now the violins that Mussolini himself played on it, but it was not interesting for me because I could not afford it. But there are some violins that I would like to get, but you don't see them anymore. And by the way, one of the greatest killers of the German Gestapo, Heydrich, he was a very talented violinist. And I would like to have this violin. And then
What are you going to do with it?
we have one violin with a Heil Hitler open here.
Oh, I know you've written
so
about that.
it can be beside.
And a last question, before I talk to you about something else. What about the bows? We haven't really talked about them except this David Schmidt, who was a bow maker. Daniel Schmidt. Are you involved at all in making bows as well?
We repair bows, we don't make bows.
You don't make
bow
them, just
making
repair
is a
them.
completely different profession. But bows from these times, usually they did not survive. It's a bow is a very, very, as delicate as the violin is, the bow is much more delicate. And most of the bows these people had were very, very cheap stuff.
We have one bow. Playing the concert in Berlin, we got a violin with a story, German story, a German guy who played on it. And the man was blind, by the way, and the violin came with his bow. And it's very interesting because he engraved the initial of his name on the frog, what we are calling of the bow. So when he's giving to rehair and getting it back, he can touch and to see that this is his bow. And one day we will put it also that people can play with that. But usually they are broken. They cannot resist too much time.
I really want to thank Amnon and Asi and Avshi for entertaining us. And with their permission, I would like to share with you one of the names that's been mentioned quite frequently is the man Bronislaw Huberman, who was the person who single-handedly led to the creation of the Palestine Symphony. Huberman was one of the greatest violinists of the early part of the century, 20th century. He died in 1947. And recently, in preparing a radio program on Huberman, I found a recording he'd made in the 1930s of Max Bruch's Kol Nidre. And on Sunday at the concert, one of the selections was Schoenberg's version of Kol Nidre, which was very unlike any of the traditionals. This is very much the traditional manner, but it is played in a style that I don't think anybody, and you'll agree with me, in the last 50 years has played. And this is, if I may say so, the ultimate in Jewish soul music.
I would like to add,
Okay, go.
Joel Smirnoff played in Yom Kippur Kol Nidre on a violin, and in the concert of the 14, Raphael Wallfisch will play the Kol Nidre for the cello with the orchestra. And this is a beautiful piece.
His mother is a survivor of Auschwitz.
Exactly.
His
Yes.
mother was in the Alma Rose Orchestra. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
She was in the Alma Rose Orchestra.
And they sought to bring her here over, but
At 90, I don't think she's
she cannot.
really. I have a friend in London who meets her regularly. But anyway, this is a very special recording, and I think it's a fitting end to a fabulous evening of stories that probably none of you ever expected to hear during your lifetimes. Oh, we're having a technical moment of the computer rebooting. Do not expect this to be in digital stereo, but I think looking around me, most of you grew up before that. And some of you may even remember these things that went around very rapidly. But I think this is an amazing document. And one of the things that I love as a collector of recordings is these windows of the past. Keep going.
So while we're waiting for the computer to get itself going, I want to thank Eric, Amnon, Asi, and Avshi for sharing their time with us. If any of you have seen the brochure on the activities, you should know that these three are sort of running themselves ragged while they're here in town, doing 2, sometimes 3 programs a day, sharing their stories, sharing their time. And it's really only just begun, because I know with the exhibition opening at the museum, there's going to be a lot more intense activity for them. So before we play the file here, it's still there. Please, just a quick round of applause for all of our guests. And Eric, thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you. That's Bronislav Huberman, and the pianist was a man called Siegfried Schultz. And it was a style of violin playing. To me, I listen to this, it's the shtetl. And that was the civilization that the Nazis wiped out, and why it's so important to have documents like this recording by a man who grew up within that tradition and is able, through the means of recording, to pass it on, just as it is important for Amnon to make the voices of those silent violins heard throughout the world. Thank you.